The ropes creaked as my father's casket was lowered into the ground. The polished wood glistened under a pale sky, and the air was heavy with the kind of silence only funerals know. I should have been grieving, but the vibration in my pocket pulled me into another reality. I slipped out my phone, guilty eyes darting to see if anyone noticed. One line glared back at me. "Don't cry, he's not in there." My breath caught. My thumb hovered, then typed before I could think. "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "I'm the son he never told you about." My name is Christopher Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and until this morning, I believed I was my father's only son. Richard Mercer, respected businessman, pillar of the community, a man whose approval I spent most of my life chasing, was supposed to be resting beneath that mound of earth. And yet, someone was telling me I wasn't mourning alone. I stood among the mourners, my tie too tight, my palms damp, scanning the rows of black suits and veiled faces. My mother, my adoptive mother, though I didn't know that then, was flawless in her grief. Back straight, chin raised, she clutched her gloves with the same discipline she used to hold our family together. She looked like a queen at court, and in that moment I realized she wasn't surprised. Broken, yes, but not surprised. The shovel struck earth, scattering soil across the casket lid with a hollow thud. Each sound should have sealed the finality of death, but instead it cracked something open inside me. If there was another son, then what else had my father hidden? The phone buzzed again. "You don't know the whole story. Meet me tonight." I wanted to believe it was a cruel prank, the kind people whisper about when a family of stature buries one of its own. But something deeper, an instinct I couldn't name, told me this was real. My father's silence, the sudden trips, the way his eyes sometimes carried a sorrow he never explained, it all rushed back. I glanced again at my mother. She kept her face composed, as if grief itself was something to be managed. And I loved her for it. God, I did. But love doesn't erase doubt. If she knew more than she let on, then the man we had buried wasn't the man I thought I'd known. The crowd began to drift toward the waiting cars, their voices hushed and polite. I stayed rooted by the grave, phone heavy in my hand, staring at the dirt as if it might answer me. Somewhere out there was a man who claimed to share my blood. And as much as I wanted to turn away, I knew I couldn't, because no matter how much earth they shoveled onto that casket, my father wasn't finished with me yet. Night fell heavy, pressing against the windows of my car as I drove out of town. The streets were slick with rain, streetlights bending into gold streaks on the asphalt. I hadn't told my mother where I was going. I hadn't told anyone. How could I? How do you explain to grieving relatives that you're about to meet a man who claims to be your father's hidden son? The address from the text led me to a diner I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Neon buzzed above the door, half the letters burned out. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions clung to the air. He was waiting in the far booth, back against the wall, like a man who preferred to see everything coming. At first glance, he could have been anyone, but then I saw it, the unmistakable echo of my father and the angle of his jaw, the gray threading his hair at the temples, the way he sat with a quiet authority. "You're Christopher," he said, his voice low, steady. I froze halfway across the diner. "And you're the one who sent those messages?" He nodded once. Michael Hale. Hale. My father's name. The word hit me harder than I expected. I slid into the booth across from him, my pulse loud in my ears. Up close, the resemblance was worse or better. I couldn't decide. It was like looking into a mirror distorted by time, features I knew too well arranged on a stranger's face. "I don't believe you," I said. Michael didn't argue. Instead, he placed an envelope on the table and pushed it toward me. Inside were photographs, old and yellowed at the edges. My father, younger, his arm draped around a woman I'd never seen before. Dark hair, strong eyes, smiling like the world belonged to them. And in her arms, a boy. Michael. My throat tightened. I flipped through more pictures. Birthdays, picnics, small moments frozen in time. My father was in all of them, not as the distant figure I remembered from business trips and obligations, but as a man laughing, relaxed, alive. I shoved the photos back into the envelope. Why now? Why send me that message today? Michael leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. Because it was his last request. Before he died, he gave me letters. One was for me, one was for you. He wanted us to meet, not as strangers, but as brothers. The word burned in my chest. Brothers. I wanted to tell him to leave, to crawl back into whatever shadow he had lived in, but another part of me, some stubborn, aching part, needed to hear more. Michael must have seen the conflict in my face. He didn't push. He just reached into his coat and laid another envelope on the table, thicker than the first. This is his letter to you. Read it when you're ready. I didn't touch it, not yet. Michael sat back, his hands folded, patient. He loved you, Christopher, more than you know. But he carried a life he couldn't share, and it tore him apart. He wanted the two of us to have what he couldn't give himself, a family without secrets. Outside, a truck roared past, rattling the diner windows. I stared at the envelope like it might detonate. For the first time in my life, I felt both less alone and more fractured than ever before. And I couldn't shake the thought that opening that letter might change everything I thought I knew about my father and about myself. The house was quiet when I got back. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but presses down on you. My mother's car was in the driveway, the curtains drawn, every lamp in its place as though grief could be contained by order. I stepped inside. The scent of polished wood and lavender clung to the air, the same as always. My mother was in the living room, still in her funeral dress, her posture straight in the high-backed chair. She hadn't removed her gloves. A single lamp cast her in amber light, her face carved into control. "You're late," she said, without looking up. "I needed air," I answered. My voice cracked more than I intended. She finally turned her eyes to me. Sharp, blue, unflinching. The eyes of a woman who could host dignitaries at dinner while bleeding on the inside. "Air doesn't take 4 hours, Christopher." The envelope Michael had given me burned against my chest from the inside pocket of my coat. I wanted to throw it on the table and demand answers. Instead, I sat across from her, studying the woman who had raised me. She reached for the teacup on the table beside her, movements measured, deliberate. "You looked pale at the graveside. Were you unwell?" I swallowed. "I got a message." Her hand froze around the cup's handle, a pause so slight most would have missed it, but I saw. "A message?" she asked, her voice carefully even. "Yes," I leaned forward, testing her. "From someone who claims to know father." Her lips pressed together, the faintest tremor at the corners. She set the cup down without drinking. "Christopher, grief invites scavengers, people who want to attach themselves to legacy. You mustn't let them toy with you." Toy with me. The phrase echoed in my mind. She didn't ask what the message said. She didn't even ask who it was from. It was as if she already knew. I studied her hands. Hands that had tied my shoelaces as a boy, adjusted my tie for job interviews, clutched mine at hospital bedsides. Hands that had steadied me all my life. And now those same hands were steadying a lie. "Mother," I said quietly, "was there ever anyone else?" Her eyes locked on mine, cold and clear. For a moment I thought she would deny it outright, but instead she adjusted her gloves,
a gesture so practiced it was like armor sliding back into place. Your father was a complicated man, but you are his son. That is all that matters. The words should have soothed me, but they didn't. They sounded like a verdict, like a line rehearsed too many times. I stood, pacing the room, my pulse hammering. Why does it feel like you're not surprised? Why does it feel like you've been preparing for this conversation my whole life? Her chin lifted, proud even in pain. Because I knew one day the past might come knocking, and I prayed it wouldn't be while you still needed me. The admission sliced through me. Not a confession, not quite, but close enough. "Who is she?" I asked. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the fireplace. The flame had died, but she stared at it as though it still burned. "He's no one you need to concern yourself with." The lie was gentler than I expected, almost tender. I clenched my fists, the envelope heavy in my coat, the truth waiting inches from me. But when I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, who had stood as the last pillar of appearances, even as the ground crumbled, I couldn't bring myself to break her. "Good night, Mother," I said, though sleep was the last thing on my mind. I went upstairs, but her voice followed me, calm, deliberate, unyielding. "Christopher, sometimes the dead leave behind more than we can bear. Remember that." I shut my door and leaned against it, heart pounding. For the first time I was certain, my mother knew more than she would ever admit, and the truth wasn't just waiting in Michael's envelope. It was buried in the very walls of this house. The envelope sat on my desk like a live wire. I hadn't dared touch it since Michael pressed it into my hands at the diner. All night I lay awake, replaying his words, replaying my mother's carefully measured silence. But the longer I avoided it, the heavier it seemed to grow, until the weight of it was pressing against my chest. At dawn, I gave in. My fingers shook as I broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, the handwriting instantly familiar. Sharp, deliberate strokes I'd seen countless times on birthday cards and notes slipped under my bedroom door. My father's hand. "Christopher," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. And with my absence, the truth will follow. For years, I lived a life divided, one I never wanted for you. I loved your mother in the only way I could, through loyalty, through duty. But love, real love, belonged to another. I failed to be brave enough to live openly, and for that you will carry questions I cannot answer." I stopped, pressing the page to my chest. My eyes burned, but I kept reading. "You were never unloved, Christopher, not for a single breath. If I seemed distant, if I seemed fractured, it was not because of you. It was because part of me was always elsewhere, in a life I built in shadows. You have a brother. His name is Michael. He was born before you, and through him I found pieces of myself I could not share in the world we built together. But it was you, Christopher, who carried my name, who lived in my home, who gave me purpose when I might otherwise have broken." The words blurred as I read them, but I forced myself onward. "My greatest sorrow is that you grew up apart, unaware of each other. My greatest hope is that my death will undo what my life could not. I asked Michael to find you. I asked him to tell you what I could not. My last wish is that you will see in each other what I saw in both of you, strength, kindness, and a chance at something more honest than the life I left behind." I dropped the letter onto the desk and buried my face in my hands. The air in my room felt thin, as if even oxygen refused to comfort me. He had lived his life split in two, but not out of malice, out of weakness, out of fear. And yet, he had loved me. That much was clear. The thought both healed and hurt. A soft knock came at my door. I shoved the letter aside, wiping at my face. My mother stood in the doorway, still in her black dress from the night before, as though she hadn't moved. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. "No," I admitted. Her eyes flicked to the desk where the letter lay half-folded. She didn't step closer. She didn't ask to read it, but she knew. I saw it in her tight line of mouth, the way her hands gripped the doorframe. "There are things you cannot change, but you can decide what to do with what remains." I wanted to ask her, "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me grow up blind?" But the words wouldn't leave my tongue. Because no matter how heavy her silence was, I still loved her. She had been my mother in every way that counted, and shattering her now felt like betraying myself. After she left, I turned back to the letter. At the bottom, my father's signature sprawled across the page, bold and final. And beneath it, one last line, a postscript written smaller, almost as if meant for my eyes alone. "He's not in there, Christopher. Not the man I truly was. Find your brother. Find the rest of me." The paper trembled in my hands. I realized then that the message at the funeral hadn't just been Michael's, it had been my father's voice, carried forward. And for the first time since the earth closed over his coffin, I felt the urge not to bury the truth, but to unearth it.
The lawyer's office smelled of leather and old books, the kind of place where secrets are wrapped in formality. I sat at the long mahogany table beside my mother, her posture impeccable, as though this were another social event she had to endure with dignity. Across from us sat Mr. Aldrich, my father's attorney for as long as I could remember. "Your father's affairs were, as you might expect, extensive," Aldrich began, sliding a stack of folders across the table. "Some assets are straightforward. Properties, accounts, company shares. Others are more complicated." The way he said it made my pulse quicken. He opened one folder, revealing spreadsheets dense with numbers. Over the years, significant funds were diverted to accounts outside the usual channels. At first, I believed them to be investments, but they were not. My mother's jaw tightened. "What were they then?" Aldrich hesitated, as though choosing his words carefully. "Support, regular payments, to a household not listed under the Mercer name." The room tilted. My stomach clenched. I forced my voice steady. "You mean, to another family?" Aldrich met my eyes, his expression unreadable. "Yes." My mother didn't flinch, not once. She simply pressed her gloves tighter against her lap, her knuckles white beneath the fabric. "Are you telling me," I said slowly, "that my father was financing them all along, that while I—" My throat closed around the rest of the sentence. Aldrich slid another folder forward. Inside were copies of bank transfers, letters, even medical bills, receipts for school fees, mortgage payments, groceries, all in the name of a woman I now recognized from the photographs Michael had shown me. Her life had been sustained by the same man I'd buried days ago. I pushed the folder away, my hands trembling. The numbers blurred on the page. "How much?" I asked. Aldrich's voice was quiet. Enough that it was never a strain, but enough that it was deliberate, substantial, consistent, and private. Your father ensured they never lacked. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. My mother finally spoke, her voice steady, regal. "And now, what does this mean for the estate?" Aldrich cleared his throat. "That will depend. Legally, Christopher is the sole heir recognized under the law. However, should Michael choose to press, there are documents that could complicate matters. Michael. Hearing his name here, in this setting, felt like a collision of worlds. He wasn't just a shadow anymore. He was flesh, blood, and, possibly, entitled. I thought of the envelope he had given me, the letter from my father, the line written just for me. Find your brother. Find the rest of me. For the first time, I saw what it meant. My father hadn't just wanted me to meet Michael. He wanted me to share the weight he had carried. "Christopher," Aldred said, his tone gentler now. "Your father left behind wealth, yes, but he also left behind choices. You'll have to decide what kind of legacy you want to carry forward." I glanced at my mother. Her face was unreadable, polished into stone. But her silence screamed louder than words. She had always known. She had lived with the arrangement, tolerated it, perhaps even bargained for it. The room felt colder than the graveyard. I stood, my chair scraping back. "I need air." Neither of them stopped me as I walked out. On the street, the city buzzed with life, indifferent to mine unraveling. For the first time, I realized that my father's double life hadn't been hidden in shadows alone. It had been woven into the very fabric of my upbringing. Every gift, every comfort I'd been given might have been balanced by what he sent elsewhere. I pressed a hand against my chest where his letter still rested in my coat pocket. "He's not in there." The words echoed again, sharper now. Because the man buried in that coffin wasn't the whole father I thought I knew. And maybe the brother he left behind was the only one who could help me uncover the rest.
The city lights blurred past as I drove, the letter from my father replaying in my head with every mile. His words had been clear. Find your brother. Find the rest of me. But clarity didn't make it easier. It only sharpened the ache. Michael was waiting at the same diner. He sat in the same booth, back against the wall, eyes scanning the room the way soldiers do. When I walked in, his gaze found me instantly, as if he'd known I would come. "You read it," he said, no question in his tone. I slid into the booth, the smell of stale coffee and grease wrapped around us. I read it, and I took a breath. It changes nothing. And everything. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, humorless but understanding. "That sounds about right." I leaned forward, my voice low. "The lawyer told me about the accounts, about the support. You and your mother? He kept you hidden, but not forgotten." Michael's eyes softened, though his posture stayed guarded. He did what he could. It was never enough, but it was something. I grew up knowing who he was, even when the world couldn't know me. I saw him when I was a boy, when I was a teenager, but when I asked why I couldn't meet you, why he kept you apart, he said, "One day, when the time is right." The words lodged in my throat. One day. And that day had come only after death. "Do you resent me?" I asked, before I could stop myself. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, where rain streaked the glass. "Sometimes. You got his name, his house, his world. I got scraps. But then, you also got the burden of being his heir. You lived inside the cage he built. I was free, even if freedom meant being invisible." His honesty cut deeper than anger would have. The waitress came by, dropped 2 mugs of coffee, left without waiting for an order. Michael wrapped his hands around his, though he didn't drink. "You should know," he added. "I don't care about the money." I narrowed my eyes. Everyone cares about the money. Not me. His gaze locked onto mine, steady, unflinching. "I came because he asked me to. Because his last words were about you. Not accounts, not property. You." The envelope in my pocket felt heavier than ever. "Why?" I asked. "Why me?" Michael leaned back, his shoulders loosening for the first time. "Because he loved you, Christopher. I know that's hard to believe, but he did. He just didn't know how to love us both without breaking everything else. And in the end, he chose to leave it broken for us to fix. Silence stretched between us, thick and raw. For the first time, I saw the lines of weariness on Michael's face. Not bitterness, but the tiredness of a man who had carried truth too long. I sipped the bitter coffee, my throat dry. The lawyers said you could contest the inheritance, that you could make this official. Michael's jaw tightened. Do you want me to? The question hung there like a knife. I shook my head slowly. I don't know what I want, but I know what he wanted. He didn't write me about money. He wrote me about you. Michael nodded once, as if that was enough. Then maybe that's where we start. For the first time, the tension eased. Not gone, not forgotten, but shifted. We weren't rivals across a table of numbers. We were two men sitting in the ruins of our father's secrets, trying to decide what came next. I didn't say it out loud, but the thought echoed anyway. Maybe this was the only inheritance that mattered.
The house was quiet again when I came back from the diner. Too quiet. I pushed open the door and found my mother exactly where I'd left her the night before, in the living room, seated in her high-backed chair, still in black, her posture straight, as if grief itself had to obey her. "Christopher," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge, like glass ready to shatter. "You've been meeting him." It wasn't a question. I froze in the doorway. "You knew." Her hands tightened around the armrests. "Of course I knew. I knew long before you did." The words cut clean. I stepped closer, my shoes sinking into the rug that had muffled so many family gatherings, so many carefully orchestrated dinners. Now it felt like walking into a courtroom. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked. "Why let me grow up blind?" Finally, she raised her eyes to me. They were sharp, steady, but glistening. "Because the truth would have destroyed you, and because your father begged me not to. He thought he was protecting you, Christopher. He thought appearances would give you stability, even if they cost him his peace." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout, but the sight of her, this woman who had held me through fevers, who had cheered at graduations, who had sat stone-faced beside a coffin only days ago, kept me tethered. "You carried this all these years?" I asked. Her lips trembled, the first crack in her armor. "Do you think it was easy? To watch him leave for nights I couldn't question? To know there was another woman, another child, and still host dinners with a smile? I endured it because that was the bargain. I would raise you as mine. I would give you a name, a home, a world without scandal, and in return, I would swallow the rest." The silence after her words was heavier than the funeral soil. "You did love me, though," I said, my throat tight. Her answer came quick, fierce. "More than anything. You were never borrowed to me, Christopher. You were mine the moment I held you. Nothing changes that." Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I paced the room, the envelope from my father heavy in my coat. "Do you know what he asked of me?" She tilted her head, wary. "He asked me to find Michael, to see him not as a shadow, but as a brother. That was his last wish." Her face went pale. For the first time, she looked smaller, fragile. "And will you?" I hesitated, staring at her, the woman who had been both mother and jailer of truth. "Yes," I said at last, "because it's the only way to understand him, to understand myself." Her breath caught, though she masked it quickly, sitting straighter. "Then the world will know everything." Maybe it should,
I replied. She shook her head, eyes glistening but voice resolute. Appearances are all we had, Christopher. They kept us afloat when the truth would have drowned us. Don't let his weakness drag you under now. I wanted to argue. Instead, I stepped forward and took her hand, still wrapped in its black glove. She flinched, then let me hold it. I won't hate you for protecting me, but I can't live inside this cage anymore. Her tears finally fell, sliding silently down her cheeks, but her grip tightened on my hand. Even in surrender, she held to appearances, because that was who she was, to the end. And I loved her for it, even as I stepped away. Upstairs, alone, I realized the truth. My mother was the last pillar holding up a world of lies, and when she finally fell, the entire house of Mercer would come crashing down.
The night was still when I opened the second envelope. I sat at my desk, the lamp casting a pool of light over the paper. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this would be my father's last voice to me. The handwriting was the same, firm strokes, deliberate curves. Christopher, if Michael has given this to you, then you know the truth I could not speak in life. I lived between two worlds, a man divided by weakness and duty. I failed to unite them, and in doing so, I failed both of you. Forgive me for that. Forgive me for letting silence stand where words should have been. But know this above all else. I loved you, not with halves, not with scraps, but wholly, even if you never felt the fullness of it. Every sacrifice I made, every mask I wore, it was to shield you from the ugliness of my choices. I cannot ask you to understand, only to believe. I paused, pressing the page against my lips, the ink blurring with tears I hadn't realized were falling. The letter continued. Michael has carried the burden of my absence. You carried the burden of my presence. Both of you deserve more than what I left behind. My last request is simple. Do not let my mistakes make enemies of you. Build something I could not. Be brothers. At the bottom, beneath his signature, a single line, written smaller, as if meant only for me. He's not in there, Christopher. The man they buried was only the mask. The rest of me lives in you, and in Michael. Find each other, and you will find me. I let the paper fall, my chest shaking with sobs I could no longer hold back. The man I had buried was not the father I had loved. That man had been hidden in pieces, scattered between two sons who had never stood side by side. Until now. A knock came at the door. When I opened it, Michael stood there. He didn't speak, just looked at me, eyes raw, waiting. I handed him the letter. He read in silence, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid. When he finished, he set it gently on the desk, like it was something fragile, sacred. He wanted this, Michael said softly. Yes, I whispered. For a long moment, we stood in silence. Then I did the thing I hadn't expected of myself. I reached out. My hand rested on his shoulder, awkward, tentative, but real. He met my gaze, and for the first time I saw not a stranger, not a rival, but blood. My brother. The air between us shifted, not healed,
not whole, but changed. Later, I found my mother in the same chair, the same black gloves, staring at nothing. Her face was pale, her strength fraying at the edges. She looked at me as though bracing for judgment. I knelt beside her, taking her gloved hand in mine. "I know," I said simply. Her lips parted, eyes glistening. "And you hate me for it?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I know. You gave me love, even inside the lie. That's what I'll remember." For the first time, she broke. Her body shook with sobs she tried to silence, but I held her hand tighter, letting her cry. She had built her life on appearances, carried them like armor, and now they shattered in my arms. I loved her still. When I finally rose, Michael was waiting in the hall. I looked between them, my mother, my brother, and felt the echo of my father's words inside me. He was right. He's not in there. Because the man they buried wasn't the whole truth. The rest of him lived on, in the son who bore his name, in the son he kept hidden, and in the fragile bond that was now ours to keep alive. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something like peace.